Tenochtitlan, 1490. In the temple's inner sanctum, a kernel explodes crooked, twisting left when it should spiral right. The high priest's hand freezes mid-gesture. Silence swallows the chamber. 16-year-old Xochitl has trained for this moment her entire life. She wears the jade mask of Chicomecoatl, serpent goddess of sustenance. Tonight, she must catch what the gods reject or join them. The Spanish called it maize. The Aztec knew it as divine flesh. But when heated over sacred fire, it became totopoca, white flowers that bloom from darkness. The transformation itself was prayer. 50,000 kernels cover the temple floor from yesterday's ceremony. Each crunch underfoot is a god's whisper. Today they'll add thousands more if Huitzilopochtli accepts the offering. This is the ceremony the conquistadors would witness in horror 5 years from now, the ritual they'd call witchcraft, the tradition they'd erase from history, almost. 4 virgin priestesses surround the ceremonial fire pit. Their jade masks catch the flame's light. Above them, Huitzilopochtli's stone mouth gapes open, waiting to be fed first, always first. The high priest pours sacred maize into the flames. The kernels begin their violent transformation. Pop, 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 pop. The sound of creation itself, or divine judgment. Every kernel that pops straight must reach the god's mouth before touching human hands. But the crooked ones, those twisted by angry spirits, the virgins must catch before they hit earth. Catching means sacrifice. Missing means war. Xochitl sees it, a kernel exploding sideways, arcing toward her. Her training takes over, head tilts, mouth opens. The gods are testing her, and everyone watching knows the price of failure. Welcome to the ceremony Spain tried to bury, the ritual that turned maize into prophecy. The night when catching popcorn in your mouth meant the difference between harvest and famine, peace and conquest, life and obsidian blade. In 1519, Spanish conquistadors witnessed something that defied their understanding of the New World. Temple virgins in jade masks catching exploding white flowers in their mouths as priests chanted death omens. But this wasn't sorcery. This was totopoca, popcorn, a ritual so sacred that a single kernel popping the wrong direction could condemn a warrior to death. The Aztec Empire fell, the temples burned, the priests died, yet somehow miraculously, their sacred snack conquered the entire world. Today, Americans alone consume 14 billion quarts of popcorn annually. Movie theaters worldwide depend on it, but almost no one knows they're eating the food of Huitzilopochtli. How did a ritual requiring virgin priestesses, jade masks, and death omens become the world's most casual snack? The answer reveals something profound about cultural survival. When Cortez's men first tasted totopoca, they dismissed it as primitive Indian food. They had no idea they were witnessing a technology that would outlast Spanish colonial rule itself. The secret was in the kernel. Aztec farmers had spent centuries breeding a specific maize variety with a hard outer hull and starchy center, the only combination that creates explosive transformation. While Spanish priests burned Aztec codices and banned native rituals, popcorn quietly survived. It needed no temple, no priesthood, just fire and the right kernel. This is the paradox of cultural conquest. The empire that destroyed Aztec civilization inadvertently spread its sacred snack to every continent on Earth. In the 1890s, American entrepreneur Charles Creters invented the mobile popcorn cart. He thought he was inventing something new. He was actually resurrecting an Aztec ritual technology. By the 1920s, popcorn had found its temple, the movie palace. Dark rooms, gathered crowds, shared ritual. The architecture had changed. The ceremony remained. The Great Depression nearly killed American cinema. Popcorn saved it. At 5 cents a bag, it was the profit margin that kept theaters alive, an Aztec crop rescuing American entertainment. Those Aztec priests who read omens in crooked kernels would recognize something familiar in our modern ritual. A darkened room, a gathered crowd, and the explosive transformation of corn into something transcendent. The jade masks are gone, the death omens forgotten, but every time a kernel pops, it performs the same physics that made Aztec priestesses gasp, 3,000-year-old agriculture meeting 400-degree heat. This is why the story matters. It proves that culture doesn't survive through monuments or empires. It survives through the things too simple, too delicious, too useful to destroy. The Spanish conquered Tenochtitlan, But in every movie theater, at every carnival, in every microwave bag, the Aztecs won. Tenochtitlan, 1490. In the shadow of the great temple, something sacred is about to explode, literally. The Aztecs called it totopoca, the bursting thing. We call it popcorn. But to them, it was a divine flower that bloomed from fire itself. Every kernel held a prophecy. Every pop could mean life or death, and temple virgins risked everything to catch them. The ritual began at sunset. Priests in elaborate feathered headdresses carried clay vessels filled with sacred maize to the ceremonial fire pits. But this wasn't food. This was communion with Huitzilopochtli, the hummingbird god of war, and he had to eat first. The temple virgins, girls no older than 16, wore jade masks carved to resemble flowers. Their role, to catch the will of the gods as it exploded from the flames. Here's what the Spanish would never understand. A kernel that popped crooked wasn't just bad luck. It was a death omen that could doom the entire city. As the first kernels hit the coals, the air filled with rapid-fire explosions. The ceremony had begun. The virgins moved with impossible precision, heads tilted back, mouths open, catching the flying totopoca before it touched the ground. One slip meant the offering was contaminated. One crooked kernel meant Huitzilopochtli was displeased, and a displeased war god demanded blood. By ceremony's end, the temple floor would crunch beneath 50,000 pieces of sacred popcorn, a white carpet of prayers and prophecies. Then the Spanish arrived, and what they witnessed would appear in conquistador journals as proof of Aztec madness. But totopoca was more than spectacle. It was mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and the reason the Aztecs believed they controlled the seasons themselves. In the Templo Mayor's inner chamber, a single misshapen kernel could condemn a city. The Aztec priests called them tlacocoli, the twisted ones, and they appeared without warning in every batch. When a kernel exploded asymmetrically, splitting into jagged fragments instead of perfect white blooms, the ceremony froze. Every eye turned to the high priest of Totopoca, whose jade staff would rise or fall. The protocol was absolute. The crooked kernel had to be retrieved before Huitzilopochtli's statue could consume the offering. But no hand could touch it directly, only the virgins wearing the sacred jade masks. What the priests actually believed remains chilling. A crooked kernel meant the war god had turned his face away. Drought, defeat, or pestilence would follow within the lunar cycle unless blood debt was paid. This wasn't superstition to them, it was cosmic mathematics. In the 47 recorded ceremonies of 1490 alone, 11 crooked kernels appeared, and 11 times the sacrificial calendar was amended within days. But here's what makes this protocol terrifying. The priests had learned to predict which kernels would pop crooked based on harvest moisture, storage time, and even the lunar phase. They knew, and used that knowledge. The crooked kernel protocol gave the priesthood absolute control. They could engineer omens, justify political executions, or delay military campaigns, all with a handful of deliberately aged maize. When Cortés's chronicler Bernal Diaz witnessed a crooked kernel ceremony in 1519, he wrote, "They worship the broken corn as if Christ himself had been crucified again, and weep with true terror." The virgins who retrieved the crooked kernels underwent 13 days of purification afterward. Their hands were bound in agave fiber, forbidden to touch food or water without assistance, contaminated by twisted fate itself. But the most disturbing detail? The crooked kernels weren't destroyed. They were stored in a sealed obsidian vault beneath the temple, accumulating year after year, 50,000 omens of death, carefully catalogued and preserved. Cortés's diary, March 1519. Today we witness something no Christian mind can comprehend. 20 conquistadors stood frozen at the temple entrance, their armor slick with Tenochtitlan's humid air. Before them, 12 virgins aged 13 to 16 descended the temple steps. Each wore a jade mask carved to resemble Xilonen, the young Maize goddess, faces frozen in eternal youth, eyes hollow and gleaming. The girls formed a perfect circle around a fire pit 6 feet wide. Inside, flames danced blue and orange, fed by copal resin that made the air shimmer and twist. High priest Xochitl raised a clay vessel filled with dried maize kernels. The Spanish soldiers clutched their swords tighter, not from fear of attack, but from what they couldn't explain. He poured the kernels into the flames. Within seconds, the first pop echoed through the chamber like a musket shot. Then another, then a thunderous cascade. Here's what the Spanish didn't know. Any kernel that popped asymmetrically, twisted, blackened, or split incorrectly prophesied death for the empire. The priests tracked every single one. But this was the part that made Bernal Diaz del Castillo wake screaming for years. The jade-masked virgins tilted their heads back and opened their mouths. Popcorn exploded upward in fountains of white. The girls moved like dancers, barefoot on the scorching stone, catching the flying kernels in their mouths without using their hands. Not one kernel could touch the ground before Huitzilopochtli's statue, a 15-foot obsidian figure looming behind them, received its portion. This was divine protocol. This was law. The youngest virgin, her jade mask cracked at the left eye, leaped and spun. She caught 7 pieces in one fluid movement. The Spanish soldier Pedro de Alvarado crossed himself 3 times. But this wasn't entertainment. Priests circled the ceremony with obsidian knives, counting. 50,000 kernels had been poured, 50,000 had to pop, 50,000 had to be accounted for. The temple floor crunched under every step, a carpet of white that reached ankle-deep in places. The sound was deafening, popping, crunching, the girls' bare feet crushing thousands of kernels into powder. Then the ceremony shifted. The virgins stopped catching. They began sorting, every kernel examined, perfect ones placed before Huitzilopochtli, crooked ones set aside in clay bowls of blood. Cortés would later write, "They believed their god ate the white flowers first, and what remained told the future. 17 kernels popped crooked that day, 17 death omens." What Cortés didn't write, he couldn't look away. None of them could. The jade masks caught the firelight like living things, and behind those hollow eyes, the virgins never blinked. The ceremony lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the youngest virgin removed her mask. Her face was streaked with soot and tears. She held up a single kernel, perfectly popped, perfectly white. High priest Xochitl placed it in Huitzilopochtli's stone mouth. The entire temple fell silent. This was the seed of prophecy, the one kernel that would predict the next harvest, the next war, the next sacrifice. But 17 crooked kernels meant 17 deaths were owed. The jade-masked virgins knew, the priests knew, and now the Spanish knew something was coming that their armor couldn't stop. The temple floor of Huitzilopochtli crunched under every footstep. 50,000 popped kernels, maybe more, covered the stone like sacred snow. Spanish friar Diego Duran would later write about this in his chronicle, though he didn't understand what he was witnessing. He called it flowers of maize that covered the ground like hail. But this wasn't random. The Aztecs had been performing the Totopoca ceremony for generations, and the kernels told a story. Every kernel that popped was read like a codex page. Perfect spheres meant favor from the gods. Anything else, crooked, half-popped, burned, meant something had gone wrong. The priests called these malformed kernels twisted mouths. And in 1490, there were too many of them. Here's what historians missed for centuries. The floor wasn't just deep with popcorn from one ceremony. This was accumulation from an entire month of increasingly desperate rituals. As the twisted kernels multiplied, the temple virgins were ordered to perform the ceremony daily, then twice daily, then continuously, trying to get a clean reading from the gods. The crunching sound became constant. You couldn't walk through the temple without crushing hundreds of kernels with each step, releasing that toasted maize smell into the air. But here's the terrifying part. The priests kept finding patterns in the chaos, shapes in the scattered kernels, messages they claimed Huitzilopochtli was spelling out in popped corn. One Spanish observer, Bernardino de Sahagún, recorded what happened when the kernels spelled out what the priests interpreted as a warning: great houses falling. Within 30 years, Tenochtitlan would fall to Cortés. The temple would be destroyed, and Spanish soldiers would literally walk through the ruins, crunching those prophetic kernels underfoot. But in 1490, as the kernels piled higher, no one could leave the temple. The ceremony had to continue until the gods gave a clear answer. The girls catching popcorn mid-air weren't performing a trick. They were testing each kernel before it hit the sacred floor, trying to intercept the twisted ones before the priests could see them. because every crooked kernel meant another name added to the sacrifice list, and the temple floor was now 50,000 omens deep. The crooked kernel meant death. The perfect pop meant favor from the gods. But what the Aztec priests never saw coming was that their sacred totopoca would one day be smothered in artificial butter and sold for $8. When Cortés wrote back to Spain about the popping maize rituals, he called them diabolical. The Catholic Church declared popcorn a pagan food. For 2 centuries, eating it could get you questioned by the Inquisition. But the conquistadors' children ate it anyway, in secret, in back rooms, because once you hear that pop, once you taste that crunch, theology becomes negotiable. By 1612, popcorn had been stripped of its gods. No more jade masks, no more temple virgins, no more death omens, just corn, just heat, just hunger. The Aztec Empire fell, but totopoca survived, perhaps the only thing that did, because empires need belief, popcorn just needs heat. Street vendors in Mexico City sold it in paper cones by 1820. American colonists called it parching corn. At county fairs in Illinois, it cost a nickel. Nobody remembered the crooked kernels anymore. Then came 1893, the Chicago World's Fair, the first electric popcorn machine. A German immigrant named Frederick Ruckheim added peanuts and molasses, called it Cracker Jack, and made $1 million. Here's the twist nobody talks about. The movie theater nearly killed popcorn. Early cinema owners thought it was too noisy, too messy, too lower class. They wanted silence and sophistication. But then the Great Depression hit. Theater owners were desperate. A man named Glenn Dixon installed a popcorn machine in a Kansas theater lobby in 1938. Within 3 years, he owned 3 theaters. The food the Aztec priests once used to predict death and communicate with Huitzilopochtli became the thing that saved American cinema from bankruptcy. History has a dark sense of humor. Today we make $40 billion a year selling it. We've engineered kernels that pop 99.9% perfect. We've eliminated the crooked ones, we've eliminated the omens, we've eliminated the gods. But here's what we kept: the explosion, the transformation, the violence of heat turning something hard into something we can consume. We just don't call it sacred anymore. The temple floor in Tenochtitlan, once crunched with 50,000 kernels, blessed by virgins and judged by priests. Now the multiplex floor crunches with 50,000 kernels, blessed by minimum wage and judged by nobody. We still throw seeds into fire and watch them explode into white flowers. We still eat them in the dark. We still gather in temples, just ones with stadium seating. The ritual survived. We just forgot it was one. And somewhere in the genetic memory of every kernel, there's still a crooked pop, still a death omen, still a girl in a jade mask, still a god who needs to eat first. We just don't look for it anymore. The Aztecs believed the shape of the popcorn revealed the future. Maybe they were right. Maybe every crooked kernel that we ignore and eat anyway is us choosing comfort over truth, choosing entertainment over omen. Totopoca became popcorn, the sacred became the mundane, the omen became the snack. And maybe that's the most Aztec thing of all, knowing that everything, even the gods, eventually gets consumed. So the next time you hear that pop in the dark, remember, you're not just eating a snack, you're eating 500 years of forgetting. And the crooked kernels are still trying to tell you something. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out other videos.